Because I've come in here and people are saying, oh, what are you going to say to that debunk? Chris did not debunk the film. He made misrepresentations of our claims, and he got things factually wrong.
Hey, this is Ryan of Happy Healthy Vegan. So I'm sure many of you guys have heard about this. It's been blown up on social media. I watched this the day that came out, that James Wilks, the narrator and one of the two main producers of The Game Changers, went on to Joe Rogan's podcast to defend his movie from the debunking that Chris Kresser did on the movie just the week before. And Chris was there in the studio audience to get beat up by the logic and facts of James. Anyway, James starts off masterfully by asking Chris for his credentials in nutrition.
Yes. Has any of your work or your ideas been published in the scientific literature?
No, I've never claimed that it has.
I just wondered. So
you didn't wonder.
No, I did wonder. No, I couldn't find anything.
But that's not why you were saying that. You were saying that to try to make it seem that he's less of an expert.
Well, he is. I'm not an expert either. So, Chris, would you consider yourself a nutrition expert?
No. I would consider myself someone who is adept at reading the literature.
Do you know how to read a forest plot? Yes or no?
I don't.
What does that mean?
That's basically looking at the confidence intervals.
What's it called? A forest block?
Forest plot.
Plot? Okay.
Yeah, because it kind of looks like a bunch of trees, right?
Okay.
So you don't know how to read a forest plot. So have you actually looked at the study that you referenced?
I have looked at the study.
Okay, so, and the forest plots, if you did look at them and you knew how to read them, you'd show that there were 3 in the Netherlands and in Sweden that did show a significant correlation. Because what you were trying to make out with this point, which I understand when you have a point of view and you're trying to work it backwards, what you end up doing is you try and find studies that suit your position.
So with that fact established about Chris, let's jump right into the video. And let me say, their podcast is over 3.5 hours long, and there's no way I can respond to the entire thing. So I'll probably respond to some more of the topics in a future video of mine. So comment down below if you'd like to see that. For this one today, I'm going to talk about what happened in their discussion about B12.
You said there's 0 evidence that B12 is fed to cattle, right? You said that. And
so one huge benefit James had here was having Chris be on the week before, so James could take the exact quotes that Chris used and show how what Chris said was false.
I said even farm animals have to be given B12 supplements. Okay, that's what I said. So do you see that? That is a screen cap from the film. That's a chicken. And down at the bottom, there's the quote for the poultry. So would you disagree that pigs and chickens and other farmers?
No, I don't disagree that they sometimes get B12, but...
Well, that didn't take long. I mean, earlier Chris said that there's 0 evidence that B12 is given to farm animals. And now Chris says that it's sometimes given to farm animals. Well, let's see how he tries to wiggle out of this.
What about shellfish?
Chris, you said we were talking about farm animals. Last time I checked, shellfish are not farm animals.
Shellfish are extremely high in B12. They're the highest, even higher than...
That's a total non sequitur, and it's a straw man argument.
It's not actually, because the implication in the film was the only reason you get B12 from eating animal products is because they're given B12 supplements.
I said even farm animals have to be given B12 supplements. Okay, that's what I said. You're really suggesting that the population gets most of its B12 from shellfish.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I'm saying that the claim that animals need to take B12 supplements in order to have B12 in their flesh is not accurate.
Why is Chris still dwelling on shellfish? Again, the discussion is about farm animals, and James is going to take him to task on it now.
Where do you think chickens get it from?
James.
Where do you think chickens get their B12 from?
The point about the shellfish was... I never claimed chicken was a great source of B12.
I said in the film, even farm animals have to be given B12 supplements. You said that it was absolutely false. Everything that I said about B12, you said was absolutely false. Those are your words. B12 is just commonly fed to chickens, and you would agree with that, right?
Yeah.
And pigs and lamb. But since you brought up cattle, you said that cattle, there's no evidence of cattle being fed B12. So if you bring up Flight 46.
Vitamin B12 for sheep and cattle, that's what it says.
You said there's no evidence. So you said there's no evidence. So
I mean, how difficult is it to fact check what Chris is saying here? Just find one of the many agricultural products that are designed to supplement animals' diets, farm animals' diets, with B12. And furthermore, let's look at the statement of one of the largest suppliers of animal feed.
Young ruminants require supplemental vitamin B12 prior to full rumen development. You said there was no evidence that cattle are given B12. And you said that all my statements were absolutely false. Do you at least admit that you were wrong there?
if I said that
Well, I've got your quote.
cattle...
Okay, so first of all, when I made the full statement, this is what you first said. That's just all false. That's all just factually wrong. And then later on you said, there's also zero evidence that B12 is fed to cattle. That is flat out wrong, and I have just shown that. Is that fair?
I was wrong about that.
So that's something a lot of us have been waiting to see for a long time, to see Chris Kresser being forced to admit that he was wrong about some bogus claim he tried to make about veganism. In this case, B12 not being fed to cattle, that there's no evidence about it. Well, turns out that's not the only thing he got wrong about B12 in his debunking of the Game Changers.
Where's the evidence that rivers and streams and dirt has been a primary source of B12?
I'm obviously going to give it to you. Okay. You think I came here today? You think I made claims in the film that I couldn't back up?
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Well, that's some wishful thinking, Chris.
B12 concentration fluctuated between 100
So this
and
is in
2,000.
the levels of water in the English Lake District. If you want to go to slide 49. The vegetables were eaten without being carefully washed. Thus, strict vegetarians who do not practice hand washing or vegetable cleaning may be untroubled by vitamin B12 deficiency. And by the way, the retained vitamin D12 of soil was adequate to prevent B12 deficiency.
So
that's not the consensus view, that you can get enough B12 from eating unwashed vegetables.
No, I'm not
but
saying,
that's not what he didn't necessarily say. That was the consensus view. What he
Yeah, Joe's pretty sharp there. James never said that this was the consensus view, that this is how people should be getting their B12.
So we had the B12 in cattle. You had that there was no evidence. You said there was zero evidence about that. You said there was no evidence about being able to get it from water and from dirt, which again I proved to be you to be wrong. And the third thing that you said,
I said that there's no evidence that humans primarily got their B12 from eating from soil and water, which is what you said in the quote.
You're he's misrepresenting and he's wrong, Joe. You've got to admit that in this case.
So I can personally vouch for Chris misrepresenting things and just being totally wrong, because I'm glad James made this video. I'm glad James went on the Joe Rogan podcast, because it validates what I was saying in my earlier videos about Chris Kresser, where I debunked him on cholesterol and saturated fat. He does exactly the same things, and I'll link to them up above in cards and down in the show notes too.
So your third point, I said this, you took issue with my claim, okay? And up to 39% of people tested, including meat eaters, are low in B12. As a result, the best way for humans to get enough B12, whether they eat animal foods or not, is simply take a supplement. Then you said he didn't provide a reference for that, so it's hard to check. But again, it contradicts, mounds of evidence on B12 efficiency. So can you bring up slide 50, please, Jamie?
So not only does Chris disagree with the facts that James has listed there about vitamin B12 deficiency, Chris doubts that such a study exists and accuses James of not referencing this study in his movie.
But in the bottom left, where we put all of the references whenever I made a claim about the scientific research.
There
you go.
Okay.
So first of all, there's the reference. You claimed you didn't have a reference. Would you admit that you were wrong?
I missed that.
Okay,
wrong again. Is that a second or third time now?
3 times wrong about B12. Your ebook on B12, you basically said, I don't know where you got that study from. Your B12 ebook opens with the exact same study. Okay, is that your ebook on the left?
Yes.
B12 deficiency is far more common than most healthcare practitioners and the general public realize. Data from the Tufts University Framingham Offspring Study suggests that 40% of people between the ages of 26 and 83 have plasma B12 levels in the low normal range, a range at which many experience neurological symptoms. That was the opening statement of your B12 ebook, and you claimed that where you couldn't find the evidence of that study.
Oh man, that's completely embarrassing, and I'm actually, for the first time ever, starting to feel a little sorry for Chris Kresser.
No disagreement that B12 deficiency is an issue. I talked about that on my website.
Yeah, that's not what you said on the last time you were on Joe's podcast. You said, I don't know, he didn't provide a reference for that, so it's hard to check, but it contradicts the evidence. If that's not reflective of the preponderance of evidence, why did you open your ebook with it?
Great point. On one hand, Chris says that this study does not reflect the general scientific consensus, yet Chris feels confident enough about the results from the study that he opens his own ebook with it. Which is it, Chris?
It's not... Okay, so there's two different issues here. One is, do omnivores get B12 deficiency?
Right, do they?
Yes, they do.
Okay, and 40% of people tested.
In this study.
Which is the one that you referenced.
That's right. And there are many I'm not saying the study is bad.
But you
I'm
said
just
that there was
saying,
no.
let's look at all of
you
the
said
other.
that I didn't provide a reference.
It's pretty obvious that Chris is pretty shaken up, and he's just kind of in damage control mode.
What is the question here? If you're not arguing that B12 deficiency is more common in vegans
I'm pointing out that you made
vegetarians.
I'm pointing out that you
because that is what clinically makes the difference. If someone is B12 deficient,
I'll get to that.
Then they develop.
You think I'm not prepared to get to that? I will get to that. And you are the one that is recommending telling people what to eat. I am a combatives trainer. And my facts in this case are the facts.
This doesn't change anything about the facts.
Joe,
I'm recommending.
No, it does, because it's really dangerous.
The recommendation is still that people get enough B12,
Joe,
and that they are less likely to do that on a vegetarian and vegan diet.
So if you haven't noticed, Chris is trying desperately to change the topic here, and fortunately, they're not letting him do it. And in fact, James comes back to that opening statement from Chris's ebook about B12, and that's from the Framingham study. And James points out some more facts from that study that Chris conveniently doesn't like to talk about.
Joe, can we stick to the point that he made last time, as I'll never get to rebut? When you referenced the Framingham study, you didn't link to the study, you linked to an article from the USDA about the study. And that study said, again, this is the opening statement of your e-book references this study. But you didn't mention this part. Oddly, the researchers found no association between plasma B12 levels and meat, poultry, and fish intake, even though those foods supply the bulk of B12 in the diet. It's not because people aren't eating enough meat to get their B12. Tucker said, it's the vitamin isn't getting absorbed.
So how are people supposed to get B12 if the food's not necessarily doing it? Well, James points out supplements are the best way to get B12.
So this backs up my claim that the safest way to get B12 is to take a supplement. Because I said the best, safest way for everyone to get B12 is to take a supplement. You say, well, you can just spend $60 and get a blood test. Yeah, but you've got to recognize that in the world, not everybody can afford $60. Okay, so the safest way to get B12, whether you eat meat or not, is to take a B12 supplement.
But then when you've got studies that show, 11% of omnivores have B12 depletion versus 77% of vegetarians and 92% of vegans.
I've seen Chris throw this study out time and time again, trying to debunk veganism, saying that 92% of vegans are vitamin B12 deficient. Well, how can that be? In a world of supplements, how can 92% of vegans be B12 deficient?
This is your slide, right? This is because this is how I can show that he's handpicking these studies to make his claim. You said that 92% of vegans were deficient in...
Let's read what it says.
This is from 16 years ago, by the way.
Okay.
And a very small study from 16 years ago. And this is why I show you that he's handpicking the data that he uses. And this is where I go back to the fact that it's about the interpretation of the totality of evidence. And you can't really rely on someone that's not a nutrition expert handpicking studies to suit their bias. In subjects who did not consume vitamins, the levels were what Chris said, right? 11% in omnivores, 70% in...
So, yep, that's right. Chris Kresser has long been citing this study to debunk veganism, a study from 16 years ago with a small sample size, and all the subjects, or I should say none of the subjects, had any kind of B12 supplementation in their diets. So, yeah, of course you're going to find people who are deficient, but this is just completely nuts. We all know that B12 absorption is an issue, and that we all should be supplementing with B12. And James calls them out on this by showing them modern studies with larger sample sizes that have subjects that supplemented with B12.
And this is for a newer study from 2018 with twice the sample size. The studied markers indicate a generally sufficient cobalamin status independently of the diet preferences, lacto-ovo-vegetarian or vegan. Now, this is a study that looked at runners in May of 2019, really current. This is comparing vegans, vegetarians, and omnivores.
And these are runners?
Yeah, and
recreational runners.
Recreational runners, yeah. All three groups showed an adequate biomarker status of B12-related parameters. So the vitamin B12 status of supplement users of vegans and omnivores was higher compared to the non-supplement users. And a higher proportion of non-supplement users had B12 parameters outside the reference range. They were low. Again, that's more evidence that it's a good idea to supplement in general.
Just take the supplement, bro.
Because you just have higher levels. And the consensus recommendations, after you get over 50, you have lower intrinsic...
It's a water-soluble vitamin anyway, right?
Yeah, but after 50, you lose intrinsic factor, so you can't absorb as much. So
right,
the
recommendation... But it's not...
So James's explanation there shows why my B12 levels have been so high. I always wondered why my B12 levels are like in the top 3% of the North American population. It's because I'm taking supplements, and most people, unfortunately, are not. And also, too, I'm over 50, so I should definitely be supplementing.
You handpicked a study where vegans were not...
No, I didn't handpick a study, James. There's many studies here.
No, you picked one where they were not taking vitamins, and I agree.
We should take vitamin.
Vitamin B12.
I see what you're saying.
And we agree that most people are getting their B12 supplemented anyway, just indirectly through animals. Fair enough? Anyway, you got things factually wrong about B12. So to the people listening or watching, do you really want to put the interpretation of the data in the hands of someone that just got so many things wrong about B12?
There still stand that vegetarians and vegans have much higher rates of B12 depletion or deficiency than omnivores. The bulk of the studies
If they're supplementing, they do not.
If they're supplementing, they don't. But if they don't
right, but everyone agrees.
They do.
But like, there's no disagreement.
Chris, did you just not hear a word of what James said? Even Joe understands this. Take a supplement, whether you're a vegan, vegetarian, or meat eater, and B12 deficiency will be a non-issue for you.
Right.
Vegans and vegetarians and anyone over 50, and like the safest way, and you're now disputing the safest way to get B12 is to take a supplement. It's the best way to get B12.
It's the surest way to get B12, but it's not necessary for many people.
For people that can afford to get blood tests, which is not most of the world.
Products.
Chris, you just got to give up on this point because you're so wrong. Yeah, you're right that some people don't need to take B12 supplements. Yeah, if you have the fortunate luck of going to a doctor and getting a blood test and seeing that your B12 levels are fine. But for everyone else, yeah, the best way to get B12 is just to take a supplement. Why fight that basic idea for?
So what you come onto Joe's podcast, and you're supposed to, like, people are supposed to believe that you are the best person to, because you say it's about the meta-analyses and you say it's about the totality of evidence. We agree. What you're suggesting is that people should listen to your interpretation of the evidence when you get things factually wrong, unable to read a single study and understand it. I am not qualified either.
That's a mischaracterization.
Okay, then tell me with the confidence interval of this in the forest plot.
So, listen, I'm presenting. I've never.
You've presented some studies. Anyone can say anything about studies.
I've not put myself out like I'm the expert that.
As you can see here, this is an amazing video, and I recommend that you guys all go to Joe Rogan's YouTube and just watch it now, assuming you have 3.5+ hours. But I was watching this last week on Thursday, just captivated. I couldn't believe what I was watching James respond to all these points that Chris made the week before, trying to debunk what James said in the movie, and just James going through in front of Chris's and Joe's face, responding point by point by point with overwhelming science and showing how Chris is misleading and not being totally truthful and just not understanding the science half the time. So James is my new hero. I don't even know why I should keep on making YouTube videos, to be honest with you, because he does this obviously 100 times better than I do. And speaking of James, I was hoping maybe some of you guys out there can verify this for me. We heard that someone said they saw a photo or video of James wearing a Happy Healthy Vegan t-shirt. So if you know anything about that, please let us know, because that would be totally awesome if James knows what we're doing, because, you know, we're not worthy. Seriously. It'd be an honor if he was wearing one of our shirts. But anyway, comment down below. Let me know what you thought when you watched this video. I mean, what do you think? Should I make some more episodes covering what they talked about protein? Because the same exact thing happened there. James went through point by point, showing how everything Chris said was wrong once again. And Joe even said in a follow-up post on his social media that Joe is thinking about taking down the prior video, the one with him and just Chris debunking the movie, because James did such a thorough job here. Joe feels like the debunking video, it was just completely wrong and misleading. So let me know what you think about that. And, you know, I think we've changed, but James has changed Joe's opinion drastically here. So comment down below, let me know what you thought about Joe's video here with James, and I guess that's it, guys. So until next time, remember, let's vote vegan. Yes, I'm running for City Council in Long Beach, District 2. If you live in Long Beach, you can vote for me next year in March. And if you live anywhere in the United States, you can contribute to my campaign. Please, everyone, go check out my website, ryanlum.net.
Spinning round and round, spinning till I'm dizzy, falling to the ground. You've got me spinning circles round